Hello, my name is Thane and I like to experiment with AI art. Midjourney has released another minor update to version 4 on 8th of December 2022. Everything looks completely different again, and I did not even have time to look into style and stylize yet. Let's see what the usual prompts look like now. So let's get started again. Number 1. Sphere. We will start again with spheres. The most default image that you can get with a specified seed 777 is this. It looks really nice and sharp and has nice details. Compared to the history of changes, the 4.0 or basically 4A style is significantly different. I do think that the latest update looks the sharpest. Let's see what the portrait aspect ratio has in store. I still love the desert one, it's almost in frame this time. And the upper left image has some nice architecture reflecting through the glass sphere. And the evolution of the portrait version looks like this. The desert has returned and other spheres look completely different. There is no version v4.0 as this aspect ratio was not supported in that version. For landscape ratio or 3:2 ratio, the sphere brings in some very nice images. Beautifully ornate and very sharp. I like the architecture inside the lower right image. There are still some barely noticeable light edges on these images and maybe the colors are a bit muted, but overall very nice. Compared to the changes across different versions, the current update changed a lot for the images. They're all totally different, maybe only one of them looks slightly like one of the images in the previous version. This time all the spheres are nicely inside the frame. It was the case last time as well, although one of the images looks like a very tight fit. Number 2. Landscape. In the square aspect ratio we have some more green back. A little bit blur is still visible in the images. And we have some green color besides the desert landscape brown which plagued us in the last update. So yes, compared to the progression of different versions, there is some sharpness lost and the images are going back towards the version 4.0 a little bit. Again, different seeds may show completely different results, but this is an accurate representation of the same seed 777 across now 4 different updates. I see a hint of other colors in the portrait version. There is purple grass on one of the images. The images look significantly more sharper than the square aspect ratio images. Let's take a look at the comparison of older versions too. There doesn't seem to be any houses anymore in the image. There's less water. And there's more variation in the images compared to each other. The reflections are a little bit sharper again, and I get less of the painted vibe that I got from previous version. And landscapes in landscape aspect ratio look more dramatic to me. Still some hint of light borders on these, nothing too bad. No text or artifacts on these images. I don't notice anything weird going on and the reflections look nice too. The two painting-like appearance has moved towards sharpness in my opinion. When comparing with the previous version landscapes of this aspect ratio, I do feel like the images look more similar to images in version 4.1, although the composition is slightly better. Very subtle changes. Number 3. Tree. I kind of like these trees. The lower left one has sprouted some roots. They're quite standalone, only one of them is actually in nature or just a desert. Otherwise just literally a tree. The colors are quite muted still and there is not that much variation in these images. So in comparison the roots are new. The 4B style overall seems to like just standalone trees without nature. The painting style has lessened in obvious quantities since the latest update. These trees are somewhat reminiscent of the previous version's trees of this same seed. The version 4.0 trees were still so funky and colorful. The newer versions are quite muted in color department. Moving on to the portrait aspect ratio. Very small changes. Also the colors are still very bland. Right away I can recognize most of the trees since the last update. No real improvement for the position of trees in the frame. For landscape aspect ratio I think I like these more than the other aspect ratios. There's even one rainbow tree, Yay! Slight light borders again, and colors are not very vivid. But the images look quite sharp. Even the one that used to look like it was painted with broad strokes. Comparing to the older versions, there is a tiny amount of color and less painting strokes. Not much else to report. I guess you already noticed I don't really like these trees that much. Number 4. Woman. I guess for people or women, Midjourney's new update has gone even more painting than before. I don't know if that's intentional or what's going on here. I guess these are okay. I am not a big fan of this kind of style, but as this is the default style, the majority of people must like this. It's also strange that this has happened to the portraits of people as landscapes and trees scaled back on looking like paintings. And comparing to the previous versions, it does seem that there's more broad stroke painting style now in this. The faces look recognizably similar to at least some of the previous versions. They're slightly prettier than in the earlier version. And the portrait aspect ratio has 3 painting-looking images and one that looks maybe a bit more realistic. I do kind of like that top right one. Slight light borders showing up again here, not too bad. And the lower images are painted with very broad strokes. I do not prefer that. And to compare the images to previous versions, only 50% of the faces are recognizable here. The painting-looking ones have even broader strokes than before. And the lady with the weird lines on the neck is completely gone now. I just notices that majority of the women in the images are not wearing earrings, only one of them had them in the previous version. And landscape aspect ratio for woman follows a similar pattern as the portrait aspect ratio. The faces are the same, just squished, and tops of heads or hair is simply cut off. Very painting-like with one exception. So yeah, basically same faces, looking more like paintings. I only like the upper left image of the new version. And version 4.1 images still look the best in my opinion. Number 5. Animal. The animals have gone full-on weird. None of the images look like real animals. On a positive note, all the legs are now visible and fully in frame. Or just an animal's head. And that peacock elephant looks just weird to me. When we compare versions, there has been a really big change with this latest update. The 2 before had only slight changes. So far the animals have looked somewhat realistic, but now the animals look like mystical mixtures of different animals with colors that don't match the animals. I still prefer the v4.1. So in the portrait version we don't have full animals in any of the images, just the head part. And we've got a bird fox and a rhino with 2 horns. And 2 big cats. So some of the images look maybe more realistic and some look more painted. But the hybrid is quite weird. But intriguing perhaps. I still absolutely love the v4.1 images. So I am quite disappointed still with everything that has changed with all the newer updates. Maybe some other seeds would still produce awesome looking images, but for this seed, the progression has been from awesome to weird. The same kind of weirdness as in other aspect ratios is going on with landscape ratio 2. The composition is overall wonky and the animals are weird hybrids. In the history of updates we've gone from very awesome happy elephants flashing in water to sad elephants and then to complete weirdness. Number 6. Architecture. Well, architecture seems to have gone to a very surreal direction this time. At least the 2 lower ones look really more like architecture-themed art than simply houses like before. There's even some abandoned cars in the lower right image. So in the historical comparison, I like the versions 4.1 and 4.2 more than I do the new version. The new version gives some really surreal stuff in the square aspect ratio, but I'm not sure if that is something I would prefer to see with this prompt. Now these I do like a lot more than the square aspect ratio. There are some things that could be better, but there's just something that can't be explained here. In the historical comparison, it is obvious that this version has changed a lot in appearance. The images look completely different and it is very hard to tell if there is something reminiscent of the previous versions. The colors are still not very vivid in any of the images. Now let's look at the landscape ratio as well for architecture. These are not terrible, but I probably wouldn't upscale any of them. The lower left one is almost okay, but still no. And when comparing the older versions of the same prompt with the same seed, I think I like the version 4.2 more than this newest version. For all the other subject matters it seems like Midjourney attempts to make them standalone, but for some reason for architecture it has deviated away from that. Yes, there's architecture in the picture, but well I don't know. I don't really like the newest images. Number 7. Flower. Flowers have been very good in all versions so far. So I've got high expectations this time too. And it looks like I won't be disappointed this time either. The flowers thankfully still look very good. There's one watermark still in the lower left image, but otherwise no faults that I can notice right away. And in the historical comparison view that becomes apparent. 2 flowers are still somewhat recognizable from the previous version actually. The other 2 have changed completely. But flowers are and have been beautiful across all versions. I wonder what has happened with all the other prompts I have been testing that they are getting worse with each update basically. Oh wow! The portrait versions of flowers really take my breath away. These look absolutely stunning and the colors are very nice as well. These colors are definitely not muted like majority of the prompts I have tested so far. Deliciously beautiful. And hey, no floating leaves this time either. So last version in the portrait ratio improved on the version before that and it really looks like this version has improved more. Yes, there still seems to be slightly cut off edges, but I don't care, because I think these new flowers look absolutely stunning. And the landscape ratio looks good as well. I absolutely love the bold colors on these flowers. The lower left flower kind of looks like it's made of liquid gold and it's melting a little on the edges. And the top right flower looks like it has all the colors. Like a rainbow almost. I don't know if I should bother mentioning the thin light borders anymore as it does seem to feature basically in all landscape or portrait images. The history shows that the flowers have been improving slowly over time. Good job, Midjourney. With all the disappointment with the other test subjects, at least some prompts are improving. So it gives me hope that when using other more detailed prompts, the images will look great too, depending on the prompt probably. Number 8. Statue. Statues have given me some excellent results before. These statues of square aspect ratio look okay. It is still kind of unique prompt to make the images look basically like photographs of statues. So the same is still true in the newest version. We have some very statue-looking statues and not paintings of statues. And to compare the history, it seems like the statues have regained their gender balance. We are now at 50% female, 50% male ratio. The male statues have gained even more muscle. I suspect these statues are doing bodybuilding and hitting the gym between these updates. And the portrait version of statues leans heavily towards female statues. 3 angels this time. So yes, the only male statue in the portrait aspect ratio has been hitting the gym as well. The lady next to him has some questionable clothing choices and the 2 angels look quite statue-like. The upper right one reminds me the Statue of Liberty for some reason. But in comparison to older versions, the gender balance has skewed in another direction with more angel statues coming in with each update. The landscape aspect ratio has also lots of angels. More male statues than female statues in this aspect ratio. There is still issues with statues fitting in the picture with heads being clipped. I guess in the historical comparison the landscape ratio is a little bit better now than previously. Male to female ratio has gone from 4 males to 3 males and 1 female. Human to angel ratio has gone from 1 angel to 3 angels. I do believe there is slight color now too in the images compared to previous version. Number 9. Emblem. Emblems in square aspect ratio look nice. Basically no text at all this time. Only downside is that there could be a little more variety. I mean, there could be more than just birds and the colors could be bolder in my opinion. Other than that, quite nice. In the historical comparison, I don't have the 4.0 version, but it is still obvious that this current version is the best one in terms of having less text on it. All previous versions usually had some kind of text. I guess the colors were a bit brighter in some of the previous versions, but it's always possible to add in some more prompt words to get better colors. Portrait versions look nice, although on most of the images the edges are cut off. The reason why I have decided to create and test emblems is to make use of them in designs. The portrait version barely supports that currently. The historical comparison shows that the emblems mostly no longer have text on them. And there is more birds this time. Landscape versions of emblems again have the same issue as portraits but on the sides. I guess the same issue has been there since the beginning. There are some border-looking color changes on the edges too. So yes, less text in the newest version compared to previous versions, but it doesn't help with making the images better. Square ratio is obviously best for emblems. Number 10. Logo. The logos look quite brown and bluish to me. Not much variety. Lots of birds on them just like emblems. Maybe one of them could be easily photoshopped to use as an actual logo, others contain some weird text. Otherwise the logos are nicely centered. From the historical view, I guess I did remember right that the logos were somewhat more varied in color than the latest version. Now they look kind of same as in previous versions, they each had their own style and theme. In the portrait version, there is tiny bit of color. Still quite not enough variety in color in my opinion. The text could be easily removed from the middle with an image editing tool, but that's probably no use, because the edges are kind of missing on the majority of the logos. Actually, the previous versions were quite similar to this newest version. I really liked the skull one last time, so it's too bad it's no longer appearing with this version. Not much has changed with the portrait aspect ratio. And landscape aspect ratio is 50:50. I do quite like the one with the haunted house and leaves, too bad the top and bottom are kind of missing from the frame. When comparing to older versions, there's less birds this time, but also the logos used to fit inside the frame earlier with this aspect ratio. Number 11. Skull. So this time I feel like there is some variation and color in the skulls. The colors could be more vibrant, but some of these are quite good. All the skulls seem to be shattered in some way. I do feel like the skulls look somewhat cooler than in the earlier version. We've gone back to skulls looking like decorative objects and not just human skulls. I'm still kind of mixed about the results. Yes, the skulls look cooler this way, but they're far from what skulls normally look like. At the same time, for cool pictures, normal skulls look quite boring. Ooh, I like the lower left one. It's kind of smoldering. Too bad it has 2 rows of lower teeth. The lower right one looks nice too. It has some extra flair. The top ones are kind of meh. And for portrait version, it looks like the skulls have improved a bit since last version. The skulls were very ordinary before and have moved back to something different. So the landscape ratio is a mixed bag. I like the lower ones, but the weird side borders on the left one is still bothering me. And they're slanted, so it's more difficult to crop them out. The right one is okay, nicely ornate. There has been some improvement since last version, I think. The previous version ones were so ordinary that they were kind of boring. Now they're better, but still not on the level of flowers, for example. Number 12. Map. These maps look very map-like. I like it that there's more color to them, blues and greens. Could be even more vibrant, but I like this too. Seeing the comparison of previous versions now, it looks like the maps are now more flat than they used to be. They started out as basically 3D maps and evolved to the completely 2D maps we see now. The first version still looks the coolest in my opinion. The portrait version maps have some 3D elements on them and some color too. They're okay, I guess. The newest version of Maps seems to have inherited the same issue as the version before it had. The maps are not using up the full space available to them and are just slightly larger than square aspect ratio with borders that don't even fit inside the frame. For landscape aspect ratio, the same problem appears as with portrait ratio. The maps basically look like square maps that have borders that don't really fit nicely in the picture. I do like the blue colors on these ones. So compared to the previous version, the color is a welcome change. I like the creativity of the version 4.1 the most with the recognizable map of North America. But this newest version is looking somewhat promising. Let's see where this progresses to in the future. And now let's see some bonus themes. I have selected my favorites out of the ones I generated. These themes will not have comparisons to previous versions. Number 13. Heart. I included heart in my previous video as well, and now it's in this one too. For the square aspect ratio, it looks like the preferred color scheme is gold. But the hearts are still very ornate, intricate and detailed. The portrait version of heart is also mostly golden. Although here is one pink heart too. I love the top left one where there's gold dripping down. Too bad there's a quite wide visible border on that one too. Landscape aspect ratio has some more color variants, but I think these are my least favorite overall. There's some borders and clipping occurring in some of the images. Number 14. Abstract. I really love these. They're wonderfully colorful and pleasing to the eye. And you could use these as image prompts to get wonderful pictures. And the portrait aspect ratio I love even more than the square aspect ratio. They're so wonderfully colorful, intricate and detailed. I really love both the left images, especially the lower left one. It's so sharp and has wonderful colors. And the landscape ratio ones. These are okay. Coming from the portrait version, they are not so impressive, but I don't think they're bad either. Lots of blue tones I notice here, and orange in the top images and yellow in the lower images. Number 15. Planet. I do like these, although they don't really look like planets and more like worlds inside glass orbs. So a little bit off topic maybe. Same thing happens here, but they do look really cool. The upper right one is my favorite out of these. It's kind of in space and there's a bubble containing more planets and space. And in landscape aspect ratio, there's actually some slightly planet-looking planets in space. Maybe. One of them is just cut in half. Number 16. Darkness. This is a new one I decided to try, and the results are quite nice. I don't like all of them as they may be too bland for my taste. But the top left one is phenomenal. A woman inside a tree peeking out, all grimy and stuff. And the lower right woman has just such a sinister look on her face. Wow. Very sinister looking images. I normally prefer my images with more color, but with this prompt it's very fitting to have them almost in black and white. I really like the sinister faces. But the child with the jar with a miniature man inside there is something else. Again, some sinister faces. I like the top left one with the zombie face looking through a portal or mirror. And I absolutely love the man with a cape walking in a shattered alleyway. It's so atmospheric. So here was another detailed overlook of the update to Midjourney v4. Let's see how many more of these we will get. I will be ready to compare and give my opinions on these few prompts. Thank you for watching and have a great rest of your day. Let's continue prompting.